The metallic tang of blood filled my mouth, a coppery taste that cut through the cedar and amber of my cologne. My jaw throbbed a dull ache that resonated with the frantic thrum of my pulse. I had pushed too far, of course, a miscalculation I rarely permitted myself, but the stakes had been impossibly high. My reflection in the shattered display case showed a slight tremor in my left hand. A betrayal I quickly quelled by twisting the tarnished silver ring on my right Peter's ring. They thought they had cornered me, stripped me of my carefully constructed empire, but they didn't understand. I was Victor Kane, and this was merely another act in a play I orchestrated. They were just pawns, bleeding and broken, but I was the one moving the board. That was the moment I realized I'd pushed too far, but it all began 3 weeks ago with a whisper I couldn't ignore, a deal I couldn't resist. The whisper came from old Bartholomew, a relic of the art world, whose liver was as pickled as his opinions, but whose gossip was gold. He spoke of Elara Vance, a recluse, an artist of unsettling talent, whose work he claimed with a conspiratorial wink held a peculiar sort of influence. Her pieces, they seemed to resonate with the very fabric of reality, my dear Victor, he'd slurred, spilling gin on his bespoke suit. Things happen around them, fortunes shift, rivals disappear. My interest, which had been feigned politeness, sharpened into something predatory. A rival disappearing, fortunes shifting. This wasn't just art, this was leverage, this was control. This was a way to finally erase the lingering stench of poverty from my past, to silence the gnawing shame of that crumbling tenement and Peter's final rattling breath. I'd seen enough of failure, enough of being the helpless boy who couldn't save his own brother. Never again. My first encounter with Elara Vance was a calculated performance. I found her studio in a forgotten corner of the city, a converted warehouse smelling of turpentine and damp stone. It was a squalid space reminiscent of my own childhood, and a wave of revulsion quickly washed over me. I dressed impeccably, a charcoal bespoke suit, a silk tie the color of a bruised plum, my cedar and amber cologne a subtle declaration of my arrival. I needed to project an image of effortless success, a stark contrast to the squalor, ensuring she saw me as a gateway to a world she couldn't refuse. She was peculiar, gaunt with eyes that seemed to hold the weight of forgotten centuries, and hands stained with pigments that looked suspiciously like dried blood. Her art was unlike anything I'd ever seen, abstract, visceral, almost violent in its intensity. One canvas in particular depicted a swirling vortex of black and deep crimson, with faint, almost imperceptible figures struggling within. It was disturbing yet compelling. Ms. Vance, I began, my voice a smooth caress practiced to perfection. Victor Kane, I must confess your work has captivated me. Utterly. It possesses a raw, untamed power that most contemporary pieces merely hint at. I watched her, gauging her reaction. Her eyes, initially wary, softened almost imperceptibly. People were so predictable, a touch of flattery, a hint of genuine admiration, or a performance of it, and they began to thaw. Pathetic, really, but useful. I spent hours in her studio weaving my narrative. I spoke of the stifling mediocrity of the art world, of my own struggles as a visionary seeking to elevate true talent. It was a carefully constructed lie, of course, but it resonated with her reclusive nature. I painted myself as her champion, her protector against the superficiality that would inevitably try to dilute her genius. I mentioned casually my discussions with a curator I know at the Met, a phantom connection designed to impress. I even hinted at my own humble beginnings, a calculated vulnerability to foster a sense of shared understanding. It was all a prelude, a delicate dance to gain her trust, to make her dependent on my discerning eye, my connections, my very presence. I noted her quiet intensity, the way her gaze lingered on a particular sketch as if it held a secret. My pocket notebook safely tucked inside my jacket yearned for the details of her quirks, her desires, her vulnerabilities. "Your work," I murmured, leaning closer to a charcoal sketch of a man, his face contorted in an almost impossible agony. "It feels alive, as though the emotion itself has been transferred to the page." I watched her eyes, searching for a flicker of recognition, a hint that Bartholomew's drunken ramblings held a grain of truth. She merely gave a faint, almost imperceptible smile. "They are merely reflections," she said, her voice a low murmur of what is or what could be. My mind raced. What if it wasn't just artistic expression? What if her art didn't just reflect reality but shaped it? The idea was audacious, absurd, yet thrilling. It echoed the desperate, irrational hopes of a young boy who once wished he could draw Peter back to life, healthy and whole. I pushed that thought down deep into the recesses where Peter's memory resided, a constant ache. I couldn't save him, but I would never be that helpless again. This power, if real, could ensure it. My first test of Elara's alleged abilities was subtle, almost imperceptible. I spoke of Arthur Finch, a pompous, self-important art critic who had for months been a thorn in my side. He'd dismissed my latest acquisition as derivative kitsch, and hinted at my dubious financial dealings, a veiled reference to the precarious balance of my accounts. A balance that perpetually teetered on the brink of ruin due to my extravagant spending. Finch was a relic, but his words carried weight in certain circles. He needed to be silenced. I carefully described Finch to Elara, painting him as a petty tyrant, a gatekeeper of mediocrity who stifled true genius. I watched as she listened, her eyes fixed on me, her hands occasionally flexing as if itching to create. That evening, I subtly suggested she sketch him for inspiration, of course. Perhaps a caricature, my dear, to capture his essence. I made it sound like an artistic challenge, a playful exercise. 2 days later, the art world buzzed with news. Arthur Finch, during a live television interview, had suffered a bizarre public meltdown. He'd begun to speak in a nonsensical gibberish, his words dissolving into a series of guttural growls and animalistic barks. The broadcast was cut, but the damage was done. His career, his reputation, his very credibility were in tatters. He was institutionalized, diagnosed with a rare, degenerative neurological disorder that mimicked advanced dementia. It was a perfect, elegant solution. Too perfect. A thrill, cold and sharp, coursed through me. It wasn't just a coincidence, I knew it. The power was real. My silver ring felt heavy on my finger as I twisted it, the familiar motion a counterpoint to the rush of adrenaline. This was it. This was the key. My next target was Serafina Dubois. She was everything I despised, effortlessly glamorous, financially secure from old money, and possessing an infuriating knack for sniffing out my best deals. She'd recently outmaneuvered me on a rare Fauvist piece, a sale that would have secured my position for months. She had a habit of appearing at the precise moment I was about to close a deal, her dazzling smile masking a predatory ambition that rivaled my own. She was a threat, a mirror reflecting my own insecurities, reminding me of the hungry, desperate boy I once was. I met Elara again, the scent of my cedar and amber cologne filling her modest studio, a stark contrast to the lingering smell of her paints. I spun a tale of Serafina's cruelty, her superficiality, her theft of an artist's rightful recognition. I made it personal, painting Serafina as a parasite, a symbol of the very elite who had once looked down on me. She believes herself a goddess, I mused, watching Elara's expression, but she's nothing more than a hollow shell obsessed with her own image. I subtly steered her towards creating a portrait of Serafina, emphasizing the mask she wore. Within a week, Serafina Dubois, the darling of the art circuit, was found disfigured. Not physically, but her face, once her most prized asset, was ravaged by a rare, aggressive form of eczema. Her skin flared bright red, peeling and weeping, forcing her into seclusion, her carefully curated social media presence suddenly horribly silent. It was a grotesque, poetic justice. Her image, her control shattered. My victory, however, felt hollow. It was too easy. The ease unsettled me, a faint echo of the ease with which Peter had slipped away, leaving me helpless. The whispers in the art world grew louder, hushed conversations about a strange new artist whose work seemed to carry a curse. I dismissed them, of course, as superstitious nonsense, but internally I felt a surge of possessive triumph. Elara was mine. Her power was mine to wield. Then came the betrayal. Marcus Thorne, a minor associate I'd been cultivating, and Vivian Sterling, a gallerist whose space I'd been subtly trying to leverage for my own exhibitions, attempted to cut me out of a lucrative deal involving a collection of pre-Raphaelite sketches. They thought they were clever, whispering behind my back, charting their own course. They clearly hadn't learned from my past dealings. Her hesitation reminded me of that collector in Chicago, the one whose secrets I buried in my notebook before he crumbled. I always had eyes everywhere. The news of their deception reached me through a disgruntled intern, a useful little viper I'd cultivated with a few well-placed compliments and the promise of future mentorship. My rage, cold and precise, simmered beneath my charming facade. To be betrayed, to be underestimated, it was an insult that clawed at the deepest parts of my being, reminding me of the times my own family had dismissed my pleas, leaving Peter to his fate. I sought out Elara. My tone carefully modulated, my words laced with a wounded vulnerability designed to elicit sympathy. Marcus and Vivian. I sighed, running a hand through my perfectly coiffed hair. They've betrayed my trust. After everything I've done for them, the opportunities I've provided. I paused, letting the silence hang, letting the perceived injustice sink in. They are like parasites feeding on the efforts of others, leaving nothing but ruin. I described their faces, their greedy expressions, the exact nature of their treachery. I watched as her hand almost unconsciously reached for her sketchbook. The next morning, the art world was abuzz with another, more gruesome story. Marcus Thorne and Vivian Sterling were found dead in Sterling's gallery, their bodies contorted in a macabre tableau. It wasn't a simple murder-suicide. The police report described a scene of inexplicable violence, as if they had attacked each other with a frenzied animalistic rage, tearing at their own flesh, leaving behind a horrific, bloody mess. The gallery, a stage for my brilliance, where every painting screamed wealth I'd never let slip away, was now a crime scene, sterilized and sealed off. I felt a chill that transcended the thrill of victory. This was different. Finch's madness, Seraphina's disfigurement, those were elegant, almost artistic, but this was savagery, a raw, primal horror that disturbed even me. It echoed the brutal indifference of the world I grew up in, the kind of senseless violence that could snatch a child from your arms without warning. The silver ring felt like a brand on my finger, burning. I returned to Elara's studio, my composure a fragile shield. I needed to understand. I needed to control this. She was sketching, her face impassive, her movements fluid. The piece on her easel was a swirling maelstrom of dark colors, a chaotic dance of shadows and barely discernible forms. Elara, I began, my voice betraying none of the tremor in my soul. What happened to Marcus and Vivian? She looked up, her eyes unreadable. They were consumed by their own desires, Victor. I merely gave them a canvas for their true nature. But the violence, I pressed, my stomach churning. It was extreme. She shrugged, a slight, almost childlike gesture. The art reflects the subject, Victor. Their greed, their betrayal. It was a fire within them. I merely fanned the flames. I looked at the sketch. She was working on a new one. It was a portrait of Emma, my girlfriend. My heart, a muscle I rarely acknowledged, lurched. Emma, my anchor, my carefully curated muse, the one person I allowed to believe she truly understood me, unlike everyone else who'd betrayed me. The drawing wasn't grotesque, not yet, but there was a subtle distortion, a hint of something fragile, something about to break. It was a reflection of her growing suspicion of my control tactics, a paranoia that deepened with each passing day. My control over her was paramount. Losing her would expose a vulnerability I couldn't afford. "Why, Emma?" I asked, my voice tight. "She worries about you," Victor. Elara said, her voice soft. "She sees the darkness you try to hide. She's a threat to your carefully constructed world." A cold dread settled in my gut. She saw through me. Not just my manipulations, but the very trauma that fueled them. She saw Peter, the boy I couldn't save, the shame I carried. This was not a tool. This was a mirror reflecting my own monstrous ambition, my own buried guilt. The memory of the empty gallery where a deal gone wrong stripped me of my illusions of invincibility flashed through my mind. This confirmed my deepest fear. No amount of wealth or control could erase the boy who failed Peter. I forced a smile, a desperate attempt to regain control. "Emma is an artist like you. She understands the complexities of the creative mind. She is no threat, Elara. She is my greatest supporter." Elara's gaze was unsettlingly direct. "She thinks she can save you, Victor. She thinks she can change you. That is her fatal flaw." My pocket notebook felt like a lead weight against my chest. This was beyond anything I'd accounted for. The false patron had taught me that trust was a luxury. The gilded frame had pushed me to new heights of cunning. The muse's betrayal had forced me to tighten my grip on Emma, and the stolen canvas had shown me the limits of my charm. Even the auction of secrets, where my manipulations began to attract darker forces, hadn't prepared me for this. Elara wasn't just a tool. She was an unpredictable force, a reflection of my own shadowed psyche.